All right, I believe we are live. There we go. We are live. I can never tell. It's always mixed up at the beginning when we go live from Zoom. I always see that it's updating, it's going, and if I talk, I go and play it back at the beginning, and I see that it's already started as I'm mumbling around. So now we are live. Welcome everybody here in the Zoom and whoever will be watching on YouTube. I figured tonight, it's been a while since we had a live show, and anybody who wants to join, if you're in the forum, you can click the link. I posted a link here just a few minutes back. You can click the link and come and join us. You can show your face or not show your face. It's up to you. And we'll just cover things that we've recently discovered and made known. And we'll rehash some things to kind of strengthen and encourage people. Everybody loves a good date watch, and we essentially know the time frame that we're looking at. And I was talking about this with a brother or two today on the phone, that not only to strengthen, but I was pondering it last night about how how awesome it is to understand the revelation that we've talked about over the years of Luke in order, because Luke in order is a mystery. That, I mean, talk about a mystery. What do you mean Luke in order? To be able to understand that Luke chapter 1, 2, 3, 4 relate to the 40 days of the Son of Man, the mid and the post. I mean, it's almost absurd to think that there was this mystery in there in the first four chapters of Luke. But we've been able to show it, we've been able to prove it in many, many different portions within it. And recently, this year, which was a big deal, was realizing when our brother Ivan in South Africa had shared that the words that Jesus uses in Luke chapter 4 is the wording used for the announcing of the Jubilee coming. And so when we went to look at that, and then you look up, I mean, this is something we didn't discover it. Ivan hadn't discovered it, or maybe he had and then researched it, but it's something that had been known by scholars and others out there for a long time. And what made it so great to understand in our timeline that's been revealed is when we go to Luke in order, had we known this before, it would have just been, oh, that's interesting. But knowing Luke in order and knowing where it is, I mean, my goodness, it makes it so exciting, because when we take Luke chapter 3 and we know the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar and we follow that through, we go to the history books, we go to the coins that were made, they're there in history. It gives us really a window of maybe 2 years where the connection should be. So since I'm already going down that path, why don't I start there? I'll share my screen to kind of, just to strengthen and remind. And I understand that a lot of people don't want it to go to the Feast of Weeks, whatever the true Feast of Weeks is. But in the coming year, in the new year, prayerfully not, but if we're still here, we're going to cover another piece in relation to the Feast of Weeks, because either it is the count from Nisan where it is, and then doing the count to the 8th of Sivan, or it's from Sivan, which is Taurus, and then the counts begin. There's only two options. Is there really good reason for the first one? Yes, in fact, there are some good reasons. But when we look at the second one, the one that I generally share and talk about, it is way more connected. And I believe that Deuteronomy helps prove it out for us. But having said that, as we get closer to that time or come into the new year, and we'll finally be in the year of it in our Gregorian calendar, we'll get into that some more. But with this right here, many people, I mean, especially if people are watching this and they're new and they hear this about Luke in order, they're definitely going to be scratching their heads. But we have videos, I think even called Luke in order. And we see that in Luke. It's all in typologies. These prophetic typologies that are throughout the entirety of Scripture that we've been able to show, that all began with first understanding who the synoptic gospels are speaking to and why John stands on his own. And that in the end, it's not Matthew, Mark, Luke, it's Luke, Mark, Matthew, pre, mid, post. And we revealed that it's over 14 years and the whole story. So if you're new, you'll have to watch the intro series that we have. But when we come to Luke chapter 4, we know that it's a prophetic typology of the 14th year when the Lord is returned. Satan had power over the earth for the last 2.5 years of trumpets, or the last 2.5 of the last 3.5. And now Jesus is here. He's returned, feet down, and we know that he has to deal with Satan, and Satan will be bound. And this is the prophetic typology when we see Satan there and tempting Jesus and saying, "Oh, this was given to me in a moment of time." You know, it is so prophetically speaking, even though we know that this event took place in the is, we know it's a clear picture once we understand, and as we've continued to develop the revelation in all of these scriptures that have opened up in the end of days, we can see how Satan is standing on the temple and why he's there and why he's been given everything. It's as if he's physically there. And that's because we know in the second half of trumpet judgments, which is about 10.5 or so years in to tribulation, we know Satan is cast down, like Revelation 12 says, and many other places. And when Satan is cast down and the pit is open, he's here. Now he's here in a person form or taking over a person. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but he's here. And that's the prophetic picture that we get in Luke chapter 4. Jesus returning, Satan being here, and then Jesus defeating him, and Satan's now gone for a season, just like when he's going to be bound for 1,000 years. And what got really interesting in all of this is having understood this, and this is what is so important. This is, when I was pondering on this last night, this is the stuff that, man, with all the things that have been revealed, and there are a ton of exciting things, this was a big deal because everybody on a yearly basis has, this is the Jubilee, that's the Jubilee, it's the Jubilee this year, it's the Jubilee 5 years ago, it's the Jubilee 2 years from now. It's not easy to comprehend. How would you really be able to calculate and know where the Jubilee comes from? It's very, very tough. And so how we were able to understand it is because we first had the revelation of Luke in order, that it meant pre, then the 40 days of the Son of Man, then the great mid-trib rapture time when he comes at the end of 6 years of seals, and then when he comes after 6 years of trumpets, and he's here for that 14th year, he's defeating Satan. Satan's going to be bound, is the prophetic picture. And then we read from Luke 4:18, 19, and 20 that we have this wording of Jesus proclaiming the Jubilee, which would now be at hand. And the understanding is, well, when was he doing this? Well, in the is of what happened. So if anybody's new, and you'll hear things like was, is, and is to come. What it's talking about is from the beginning of creation, from in the beginning until Christ, and then from Christ until the pre-trib, and then the pre-trib forward. So you have the was, the is, and the is to come. Everything is happening in threes. We've been able to show that all throughout Scripture, just like pre, mid, and post. And so when we come to Luke chapter 3, in reading it in the is of what happened, we see that it was in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. This wouldn't really seem to tell us much unless we understood what year that was. Now, here's the thing. Last year, when we were connecting this, before we had the understanding of Luke chapter 4 about him declaring the Jubilee, I was looking at it as being from Feast of Trumpets 2022 to 2023. And these were key points as to why I was believing this past year could be it, along with understanding, trying to understand and discern the 70 years from when they came into the land. So what was important about this and what I did on my fault is it was all about the year zero or the year one. And we've got a video just a few months back about it, because the difference between year zero and year one, well, it's a difference of only 1 year. So that when you understand the 15th year and then the 16th year of Tiberius Caesar, and understand when Jesus in this time frame that he's declaring this, if you had a year zero, yet we're operating in a Gregorian calendar that didn't have a year zero, well, then you would be off by 1 year. And that's what happened last year, because I was operating under the understanding that there truly was a year zero. Now, is there a year zero? Yes. But does the Gregorian calendar for which we operate on in our daily life, and which is counted based on the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar? So if you go to look up the history books and the records on the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, we know they weren't working in a Gregorian calendar back then. They were working on the Jubilee. I mean, on the Julian. So when you go back and look at the history records, and it tells you that the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar was 28 AD, well, 28 AD, we know it's not the Julian, we know it's not the Hebrew, we know it's the Gregorian. So when we go back in the Gregorian to the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar being 28 AD, and yet I'm counting with a year zero because there should be a year zero, well, that threw it off by a year. I realized that, oh man, by adding a year zero, everything was a year too soon, and it made complete sense. However, not when you're operating in a Gregorian calendar. And so when we realized that the year zero couldn't be there because we're operating in a Gregorian calendar, that gave us this 1 more year that's coming. And this was really, really important to understand, because when we understood now the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, it only gave us 2 options. I really hope we can understand this. There was only 2 options to the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. It was either going to be a year zero count, or it was going to be a non-year zero starting with 1 AD count. So if we've already gone through the zero and know that, hey, it had to start with a 1 because there was no zero for the Gregorian calendar, to me, you know what that says? This is the year. This year that started at the Feast of Trumpets. So can I say a thus saith the Lord? No, of course I can't. Nothing I've given is thus saith the Lord. It is through the revelation of the word, through the Spirit guiding and leading and opening all these books to us. And we can prove it because it's happened in hundreds and hundreds of scriptures. So now when I was pondering this and looking at the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, and we'd gone down, and we know that the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar in the was also related to when Jesus began to be 30. We know somebody begins to be 30 right after they finish being 29 years old. So when we now go into chapter 4 in the we know this was just shortly after. And we had the 40 days. And then we come down to this declaration by Jesus. So when we understood this and we built the Sabbath year chart, so Sabbath year or the Shemitah cycle, it's the 7-year count, which gives us 7 times 7 years. And then it's the Jubilee, right? Which is year 1. And this is very important. A lot of people have missed this. In fact, there's still a lot of debates over it. Is the Jubilee its own year, and after the Jubilee starts the next set of 7 years? No, but a lot of people debate it. It's 7 years, 7 years, 7 years times 7, and the Jubilee is the first year of the next 7 years. It doesn't stand on its own. And so what happens is when you understand that, and we went back through it from Jesus's birth, and we eliminated the year zero, and we brought all of it forward, and we kept following the counts, we see now in Jesus's day, this is another thing to understand. In Jesus's day, it was going from Nisan to Nisan because he was coming for the house of Israel. In the end of days, I believe the revelation of it through accession and non-accession understanding that we've taught, that it's going to go from Tishri to Tishri. because now it's about Judah that's in the land. He's already saved his people. Now he's got to come, give them a chance to wake up, and then they'll be part of that great multitude rapture at the mid-trib. And everything now is based on a Tishri to Tishri count. So in Jesus's day, though, it was Nisan. So you would go from 28 to 29, but then it would be 29 to 30. So we have to understand that when Jesus was making this declaration in 28 AD, because we know that the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar from history records was the 15th year was 28 AD. And we knew this. One of the fascinating things that came to our attention was the Shroud of Turin, which people have been sending me more videos. They're finding even more evidence that it was absolutely Christ. And so when we see all these other things over the years through lasers and everything that has been found, we saw that the coins that were on in the Shroud of Turin related to coins that Tiberius Caesar made in his 16th year, and it had something to do relating to his wife. So if the history record shows that it was the 16th year of Tiberius Caesar in 29 AD, well, then it's not difficult for us to understand that the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar was 28 AD when these things were happening with Jesus. So when we go into this and we see it was 28 AD, and Jesus is somewhere in this time frame of making this proclamation of the Jubilee then being at hand, by using the words that he said in Luke chapter 4 and realizing it's connected to Isaiah 61, it's connected to Leviticus chapter 25 and the count and the wording of the Jubilee. He was declaring that the Jubilee was then going to be coming. So we only had two options. It was either going to be in 28 AD, or he was declaring that the coming year, because you got to remember, at that time, it was going Nisan to Nisan. But if he was in 28 AD going Nisan to Nisan, I don't believe he was making that declaration way over here in the earlier part of 29. He was making it in 28 AD. And I believe personally, when he was making that declaration in 29 AD, I believe he was probably doing it right around near the beginning time frame as Tishri was approaching. Even though then it was going Nisan to Nisan, I believe he was in the midst of a Nisan to Nisan count, and he was close to Tishri when he made this proclamation. Because in the end, and when he was making it, the Jubilee is proclaimed from trumpets, Feast of Trumpets, to Atonement when the Jubilee blast is sounded. So he would have been making it in 28 AD, knowing that from a trumpets year to trumpets, Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets year, it was being counted there. So he was either declaring it in the case of doing 28 AD, of which he was already in, so I'm not sure how it could have been 28 AD, or he was declaring it for what was going to begin in 29 AD. So when we did this, the chart, and counted it based on the year of his birth without a year zero, we found out that Jesus began to be 30 in 28 AD. So from the 28 into 29, as he's making this declaration, we see that this would then be the declaration of the Jubilee. Well, it just so happened it was a cycle. It was the end of a 7-year Sabbath, and there was a new Jubilee. There was a new cycle of sevens that was beginning. And so then what we did from here is we simply counted out the cycles of 7 from here, and then we fast forwarded it all the way to here, and we found through our brother Jake that the 1604 KJV Bible started in 1604 and it ended in 1611. It was a 7-year cycle that landed exactly in the cycle that we had from the birth of Christ and the time frame of when he was declaring a jubilee by the words he used in Luke chapter 4 and in the revelation of its meaning in Luke in order. And we've known for years that Luke in order, Luke chapter 4, was a prophetic picture of him being here in the final 14th year when he defeats Satan and binds him for 1,000 years. And so as we did this count, we see the King James Bible, which is the most prolific, the best and most important translation out there, which is why we use it. It's the one that helped the revelation. And we followed the entire cycle. And we continued, and we continued, and we continued. We saw that 1989 to 90 was a Jubilee. And we continued and continued and followed this Jubilee. Look at where it landed. The Jubilee is 2038 to 2039, based on account from when Jesus was saying it somewhere in 28 AD. If we had a year zero, it should have been last year. If it was this coming year, which really, when you take the time to dig into it, you can maybe say there was a 3-year gap possibility, but no, because it was either year zero or from a year one count. We've already covered the year zero, and there's only the year one count left. And when we did this, we ended up from 2038 to 2039 being the Jubilee. So if we're right now actually in the 7th year Shemitah, the Shemitah year, and we have 14 years for the tribulation, which would then begin from the Feast of Trumpets 2024, we know that it goes to the end of 13 years, which would be Feast of Trumpets 2037. And here would be the Lord having returned feet down when he goes up against Satan, which is Luke chapter 4 in the prophetic typology. He's going up against him. Satan said everything was his because for 2.5 years, everything was his in the second half of Trumpets. And Jesus now returns feet down as lightning from one end. He confronts Satan. He binds Satan. And what does he do? He's going to declare a Jubilee. What do we know happens in this final 14th year? It's the wording that we get from Matthew chapter 24, which is why it's only found in Matthew. Luke's discourse is the above 14 years, the about 50 days. Mark's discourse is the 7 years of seals. Matthew's discourse is the 7 years of trumpets. And so what do we get in Matthew's discourse at the coming of the Son of Man? Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the day and hour no one knows, as it was in the days of Noah. This is something we've shared on a number of times, which means this final year, the 14th year, when the Lord returns on the clouds, he's confronting Satan like Luke chapter 4. He's declaring the Jubilee afterwards. But we know that the days of Noah is a 1 year and 10-day event. Why is the days of Noah 1 year and 10-day event? Well, it just so happens that in the prophetic context of the final year of tribulation, it's 1 year and 10 days, because on the 10th day is when they sound the shofar to announce the Jubilee. Do you realize I didn't make this? I didn't invent this. I didn't make this happen. This was a count from the time of Christ, from when he was making this declaration of a Jubilee in 28 AD, in that time frame, that gave us the entire Jubilee picture count of 7-year Sabbaths going all the way through. And it just so happens that when we adjusted from the year zero and went to the year one, because we are working on a Gregorian calendar in the world, it gave us precisely the count of 13 years and the Lord returning feet down like Luke chapter 4, exactly where we've known Luke chapter 4 was for years. And then to see that it was the Jubilee. You see, when we understand that, this is why I wanted to share how powerful it was to know that what Luke was saying what Jesus was saying in Luke chapter 4 was so important for us. It tells us so much. And the difference could be, it could only be 28 or 29. Even if you want to say, oh, maybe it was 27, maybe it was 28 AD, maybe it's 29, maybe it's 30, but the range is truly very limited. And it proves that Jesus couldn't have been born in 6 BC. So a lot of people believe Jesus was born in 6 BC because they go to the one Herod that died in 4 BC. Well, there was the other Herod that was connected to, was it 2 or 1 BC? And a lot of people have missed that. And so everything has a counter. A group believes this and a group believes that. And then a group says no to this and a group believes that. And then this side will come over here for one thing and another group will go over there. This revelation helps us to be able to see, to track it, to count it, to understand it. And we know in the revelation of 14 years, it's right there. It's I don't see how we can say, well, really it was to 30 AD, not based on the history records, not based on the Shroud of Turin with the coins, not based on coins from history that were found. It was 28 AD and then it was 29 AD. Because if Tiberius Caesar, his 16th year was 29 AD, based on history and on the coins, well, that means Luke chapter 3 was 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, was 28 AD, when Jesus began to be about 30. And this is why when we show this, it's awesome. Because here it is, 28 AD, when Tiberius Caesar was in his 15th year, and Jesus had completed his 29th year right here. And here he had just begun to be 30 years old. So this isn't Jesus turning 30. This is Jesus having completed his, somebody like in our day, he would have celebrated 29 years old. And now, so if this is for our day and age, if this is Feast of Trumpets, for example, even though we're talking about Feast of Weeks, but if this was Feast of Trumpets or the 29th of Elul, this would be the Feast of Trumpets starting. So Feast of Trumpets to 29th of Elul, Feast of Trumpets to 29 of Elul. That means Jesus's birthday had happened right here. And this began day one of his birth, of his 29 years and 1 day. That would be the beginning of Jesus as he began to be about 30. And a lot of people, again, let me make this point, because some people would say, well, no, from 0 to 1. Well, wait a second, 0 to 1, you're in your first year. And some people say, well, no, at 1 year old, you could say at 1 year old, now you're 1 year and 2 months, 1 year and 3 months. People will say that you're 1 year old. And so there's an argument that says, no, Jesus was really 30. Well, then that would push it off 1 more year. But it doesn't line up with the 70 years for Israel. So see, what happens is we end up with this more than a trifecta of everything being in line. We've got a 7-year cycle where the King James fits in. We've got the end of the 13 years, which, by the way, the end of the 13 years is the end of the 70 years from when they got Jerusalem in 67. And what do we know from Jeremiah 25? That after 70 years, destruction comes to the whole earth. They won't be buried. It'll be complete devastation. Because why? It's going to be the treading of the grapes, which is what happens when the Lord comes in this final year to deal with Satan and all those that were sided with Satan. And then at the end of it, we know it was a year and 10 days long, so that the Jubilee shofar, Jubilee trumpet can be sounded. If it were to go 1 more year, well, it doesn't line up with a year 0 or a year 1. So you would have to say then Jesus was born in 1 BC, and then it went from 1 to 2 BC, and now everything goes out of whack, and you would end up with 70 years of Jerusalem at the end of 12 years. And the Jubilee, I mean, where would the Jubilee go? I mean, you'd still have to push it out 1 more year. So everything starts to mix up. And as soon as you start adjusting one of these things, outside of having a year 0 or a year 1 count, everything else now starts to go out of whack. And in fact, Jeremiah 25 is something that we also just came to find and understand earlier this year as well, just a few months back, that went along with this. Because it was at that point when we realized that the 70th year had a connection, that it was after the 70 years had happened that this great wine press would take place. So it doesn't happen in the 70th year, which is when we had a year 0 in there and everything was moved up by 1. We had the 70th year of Jerusalem would have equaled the 14th year last year when we had a year zero, which would mean from this 14th year for 70, there would have been no time left for the treading of the grapes, which we know from Isaiah and other places is the day of the Lord, which is the year of his vengeance, which is the treading of the grapes. Well, where would that have taken place if it's supposed to take place after the 70 years? It didn't actually line up. It doesn't happen in the Jubilee. That's the restoration. So all of this is now lining up and it's in place. And as an interesting side note, when did it all begin? 2017. 2017 would equal the beginning of that cycle when the whole world, or millions, tens of millions of people, had this fixation on September 23rd. And how fitting that that would be the beginning, because what do we know about the end of days? It's not only 14 years, it's really 21. The book of Revelation, 22 chapters. The Hebrew alphabet, 22 letters. The story is a 22-year story, just like the picture of all of creation is 22,000 years. So the first 7, though, is spirit-filled. It's the releasing of the Spirit. It's the revelation. It's bringing and preparing a group for the end. And how fitting that even this ministry that started in 2017 didn't realize it till September of 2017. And what is it going to be for us? It's going to be a 7-year anniversary as well. I believe this is a big deal. I believe it's connected because we're a group of people that have been given the revelation that are mysteries that had never, ever been made known before. People have had maybe a little bit here or a little bit here or a part here or a part there, but nobody was able to make the connections. And most of the stuff that we've revealed has never been known or understood. And it had to be made known before the end began. And what do we call this in the creation? What do we call the gap theory creation? Well, we know it was spirit. And before we knew that, we knew that there was this period where the Spirit is preparing the bride. We've been saying that for years. So what was it? It's a story like Jacob. First 7 years, they flew by like days. Then you had 7 more. Then you had what? 6. 7 and 6. And then at the end of that 20 years, which was the big picture, what ends up happening? At the end of this 20 years, the Lord's going to renew the covenant. So he made a covenant with his father-in-law after 20 years. And what happens with Christ? Well, at the end of seals, he's the one making a covenant with the nations, not Antichrist. He's making the covenant. He's come down on Mount Zion. And when the great multitude mid-trib rapture comes in the 7th year, there's the 7th seal that takes place. And he's making a covenant with the nations according to Daniel chapter 7. But also we can see from Zechariah chapter 11 that it's midway through the 11th year, which is about 10 and a half years in, that he breaks the covenant that he had made, it says, with all people. And that's because at mid-trumpets, Satan is cast down, and he's got 2.5 of the final 3.5 years. This is why when the big picture 20 years like Jacob is over, or the 13 years of seals and trumpets, 6 years of trumpets portion, when it's over, Christ is going to what? In the midst of this time, he's going to renew the covenant. And we saw the same picture with Abraham. And when he has his 2 sons, we saw that it was a 13-year picture. Then he makes a covenant after 13 years. And then the Messiah typology in Isaac shows up when he's 100, a 13 to a 14th year picture. And it happens over and over and over again. Well, now we know that 14th year is the year of his vengeance. And at the end of that year, which is the days of Noah, like Matthew 24, which is why only Matthew 24 says that after his coming, is because it's from Feast of Trumpets, day and hour no one knows, to Feast of Trumpets, then 10 days to the blasting of the shofar. That only happens after the 70th year of Jerusalem. So the question is, what 70 would it be? What's a prominent 70 on the earth that people can look to? Jerusalem, his land where his name is. So one of the questions that I was talking about with a brother today, I don't know if it was with Roy earlier or with Mark, was, well, what's the other option? What if it all starts after Jerusalem completes 70? What if we have to wait till 67 and we have to go all the way to 2037 before the tribulation starts? It's not possible. This is why I'm showing you why the Jubilee count and the revelation of it is so important. Because the Jubilee count proves to us that it can't even go something crazy like 14 more years to 2037, because the Jubilee count isn't off by 14 years. It's maybe got a couple 3-year window at most. So we can take a breath. We can relax. It wasn't this past year. I believe with all my heart it'll be this year, but I've been wrong the whole way through. But the great news is regardless, it's just a short period. It's just a short window in all of the revelation where this can land. And from what I've just shown you, if you go one more year, then even if you want to say the Jubilee is one more year off, it throws off the Sabbath years, because the Sabbath years have to all move by one. And to do that, you've got to move to 30 AD and do the count from there and say that Jesus in the 15th year was really in the 29th year, even though history says it was 28. And when you do that, now you're 2 years short from when the 70th year of Jerusalem ends, and then the year of the Lord and the grapes of wrath take place. Then you've got one more year before you can even announce the Jubilee. It doesn't make sense. And this is why I believe, like I've said in the past, being able to do what we've done over the past 6 years and a bit was, we were kind of in the boat with everybody else, because we didn't know. As it was being revealed, we were looking at every possibility of event that could be the time that we would go. And then as we continued to grow, we were looking at less events because some weren't really making sense. And then 3 years in, 4 years in, we started looking in at 4 years in. I think we were looking at 3 or maybe 4 events a year that fit in. And then a couple of years ago, it went to 2. We were still looking at 2 a little bit last year. And in fact, then it went just to, I was saying back then, we waited 6 months and everybody's like, no. But we went a whole 6 months, right? Because we were looking from Hanukkah to New Year of Trees. Well, from there, I said, if not that, then the only other option is True Feast of Weeks, whether it's the first one or the count from wheat. And so we had 6 months and everybody's like, no, what are we going to do? And then what happened? Well, then this past year, people are even less excited, because we went from looking at all of these things to looking at some of these things. And then we went to looking to less of these things, to now being able to say, we can prove biblically it's connected to one event. And there are 3 feasts of the Lord. And the feasts of the Lord reveal pre, mid, and post without question. Absolutely, I promise you, they reveal in Deuteronomy 16, as we've covered many times. Feast of Weeks is pre, unleavened bread is mid. That's why it's 6 days, and then the 7th is rest. In the event coming to the Lord, no work. See, that's only an unleavened bread. 6, and what is it with tribulation of seals? 6 years of seals. The Lord comes on heavenly Mount Zion. There's no tribulation during that 7th year of seals. There's no battles, no fighting, no nothing. It's the 144. It's the rapture of the great multitude. He makes a covenant. There's nothing that happens with wars or battles in that 7th year, just like unleavened bread. And we know in that 7th year, the great multitude comes in, and that's exactly what happens, because the great multitude is connected to spring wheat, not barley, but it is observed at the time of first fruits barley. But they can't be first fruits barley, because Jesus is. because he is the one without leaven. So these guys are the spring wheat harvest that's observed on the second day of unleavened bread in the 7th year, when there's nothing, battles or anything taking place. Then you go to tabernacles, and you go to the 7 years of trumpets and 7 days of tabernacles. Is it 6 days of tabernacles and then the 7th is a solemn assembly to the Lord? Nope. It's 7 days, and the 8th is the new beginning solemn assembly. Well, what is the 7 years of tribulation? It's the 6 years, the Lord returns, but he's got to destroy all the enemies. It's the year of his vengeance. So is that a break? No. That's why those who flee on the wings of an eagle at mid-trumpets, when Satan is cast down and the pit is open, they're gone until the end of the 14th year. They don't come back when the Lord returns after 2.5, because they got to remain protected over there until the Lord deals with everything he's got to deal with in that final year, and then renew the earth. And when he does, then they will come back. Why? Because it'll be the final Jubilee, and they'll each be given their portion. So what is the 7 days of Feast of Tabernacles? It's not 6 and then the 7th. It's 7 and then the 8th. And what's trumpets? 7 years with devastation, tribulation, and all those things. And then when the 7th is over, the 8th year is the assembly to the Lord, which is called the new beginning. And what is it? It's the final Jubilee. You see, we can prove it with the 3 feasts of the Lord. We can prove it in the counts. And so if we did one more year, and you've got 2 years now from 70 years of Jerusalem being complete, and then him fulfilling 1 year, and then there's still another year before you can get to the Jubilee, it doesn't add up. This is why it's so comforting. It's so relieving. It's exciting to be able to look at this and to comprehend it and to follow it and to understand it and everything that we've understood. I'm not going to tell anybody, thus saith the Lord. If I ever get a thus saith the Lord, I'll make it the title of my video so you guys can come freaking out. If I ever get one. I've never had one. No dreams, no visions, no audibles, no nothing. Just the revelation of the mysteries of his is to come that has given us clarity in the is and greater understanding to the beginning of creation. So hopefully that helps you guys. It brings more comfort. It strengthens it. It helps you to see and to understand, hey, yes, these times have passed. Yes, there's war in Israel. A lot of people were talking about how it could be the Psalms 83 war, or Psalms 89. No, Psalms 83. Yeah. Psalms 83 war. And maybe it is. And I've said this before, when it comes to the Psalms 83 war, I still haven't been able to nail down if the Psalms 83 war is a pre-thing before everything starts, or if it's about the 10.5 year mark, and which is when Satan's cast down and everything else. I haven't been able to really nail that down yet. And so if this is the time, we know their enemies aren't going to be destroyed yet. We know that it's the time when the enemies are going to gain strength. And yes, Hamas and all this is going to begin to bring this all about. But we know the real event starts at the pre-trib escape. At the pre-trib escape, when the pre-trib happens and northern Israel is attacked by Iran. Now, does it mean that Israel won't go in beforehand and bring something about that we might still be here to see before Iran brings that strike against Haifa and Tel Aviv? I don't know. I just know that it begins pre-trib. Tens of millions will vanish, and northern Israel will be attacked and destroyed in Haifa and Tel Aviv. Devastation, but that is just the beginning. And so if we've understood this, I'll show it for people that might be new, that what we'd be looking at is, here's 2024. Like I said, we will talk about this as we get closer again. The pre-trib would either be the 8th of Sivan, and the 50 days would begin on the 9th of Sivan. and the Son of Man would return that 15th to the 16th of Sivan. But when you do that, and I think you end up, is it 26th or something like that of Tammuz, being 50 days from the 9th of Sivan, you end up in a real strange place. And what I mean by that is the pre-trib being taken is the first fruits, is the winter wheat. And this time frame is when winter wheat is actually brought in. So this is when winter wheat is actually brought in and turned into flour to bake 2 loaves with leaven. It doesn't happen all the way back here. There's no winter wheat to harvest. So as we've talked about this in the past, we understand that even though counts might suggest going to the 8th of Sivan, when we go to Deuteronomy and we see that it was related to the sickle to the corn, which is wheat, well, that changed the whole storyline, and it lined up with our count from Taurus, which is Sivan. But as that time comes, we will most certainly be watching, with holding our breath at this time. But if it's not that time, I believe, as you guys know, that we'd be looking at the 8th of Av, which lines up with the first attack, which then lines up after the 50 days from true Pentecost, because this is the time from mid of September into early October when the new wine is actually ready. And when the Holy Ghost goes after the 50th day and the anointing takes place again in what we've been calling Acts 2.0, we know that Syria will then come and will attack and destroy Jerusalem, and the Jews will flee. And this is the official beginning of the 14 years, whether it's day 1, day 2, this would be the beginning, if 2024 is the year. And this is why we've got the day and hour no one knows that we've shown and broken down many times. So everything that 6 years of revelation has shown is all there. I don't, sometimes maybe I get too excited going in a direction, but I can't find anything else that says, no, maybe it goes 7 more years. And then, well, no, you can't with the Jubilee count. Then what if we go, no, you can't with the 70-year count. If it's not the 70 years of Jerusalem, which is the most prominent year count of 70s, that's the most obvious. If that's not it, what other 70 would the Lord be trying to tell us when it's all throughout Scripture? There's something else that's going on there. And as we've talked about, there's also the 70 years that starts it. And this is why last year was also a big deal in the count, because of counting the 70 and then 3 years when they come in, 4th year to the Lord, and then the 5th year. So you'd say, well, now it doesn't make any sense because the 6th year. But there was something that was missed. And that was that we were just counting all of Israel. They didn't have Jerusalem when they came into the land. It wasn't until, 1950 or something like that? Let me show you the chart so that new people can see it too. And then we can move on to some of the other things. But we see it right here. Israel became a nation in May 1949, but they didn't yet have Jerusalem, which is God's land, which is what the Lord God counts from. We see that they had the Arab-Israeli War from May 15th, 1948 until March 10th, 49. Agreements were settled in the summer of 1949 after that war. And then Israel received that first portion of Jerusalem in around April 19th and in early April of 1950. So that's when they finally got a portion of Jerusalem. They had a whole bunch of the rest of the land, but they didn't actually have a portion of Jerusalem that was theirs. That didn't happen until 1950. And who's in the land? Not the house of Israel, the house of Judah. So we're counting from Feast of Trumpets to the 29th of Elul, from the Feast of Trumpets to the 29th of Elul. So the year goes from Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets. And then when we followed what the Lord said in Leviticus 19, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years uncircumcised. The 4th year is to the Lord. And then the 5th year, it begins to be theirs. And when we follow that with the accession year count that the house of Judah used from Tishri to Tishri, 1954, Feast of Trumpets to 1955 was year 1, and it equals the 5th year that was now, it says in Leviticus 19, that now in the 5th year forward, it was theirs. And look at where it ended up. In the beginning of a new Shemitah cycle. Right there in the beginning of a new Shemitah cycle, not from when they got the land, but after you follow what Leviticus tells them to do, even though they didn't necessarily do it, although I believe they did. They were planting the trees and so forth. But now it was theirs to eat from. And from that tree and those trees planted from that time forward, it was now theirs. And it lands on a Shemitah year cycle. So it ends up lining up perfectly that when we do this, we end up 2023 Feast of Trumpets to 2024 Feast of Trumpets being the 70th year from when they first got a portion of Jerusalem. And look at where it lands, of course, in a Shemitah year cycle. But what's interesting is the 70 years of Jerusalem, when they got the rest of Jerusalem in 1967, you see, they had already done the 4 to the 5th year count when they came into the land. So when they got the rest of the land, they didn't have to do it again because they had already done it when they came into the land. So when we counted from 1967, you would think that it should land in a Shemitah year because it's 70 years. But now we know it shouldn't. Now we know it shouldn't. Because after they've completed this 70 is the year, the day of the Lord, which is the year of his vengeance, which is the treading of the grapes. So there had to be one more year after it when the Lord has returned feet down, destroyed Satan, destroyed the enemies, and that would be the days of Noah, that final year, so that the Jubilee can then be declared. And when we go to 1967, look at where it landed. It didn't land in a new cycle. It landed starting on a on a Shemitah year, not on a new cycle. Do you realize that this, when we go through this count in what Scripture reveals, this is exactly where it's supposed to be. There's exactly what? 13 years between them. 13 years from 70, from the end of 70 to the end of 70, leaving one final year. And the only way that that could have happened is not counting from when Israel came into the land, but from when they got Jerusalem and understanding what he told them to do when they came into the land from Leviticus. None of this did we make up. Everything on this chart is from Scripture, which you can find in the description box under videos. It's all from Scripture, the whole thing. We just showed where these portions were. Things had to be figured out. You know, we thought with a year 0, and it threw things off by that difference of a year. We realized in a Gregorian, you can't do a year 0. We made that adjustment and went, oh, shoot, we got one more year. And so now we're not even looking at maybe one, like 6 months later, or no, because Deuteronomy chapter 16, as we were talking about earlier, has completely revealed that the 6 to the 7 days are the 6 to the 7 years of seals. Just like it says right here, that the Feast of Weeks is the count from the 7 weeks, the 7 Sabbaths, 7 Shemitahs of weeks, is to the corn, which relates to wheat, is the pre-trib. And then Feast of Booths, which is tabernacles, brings us to 7 days. And then to the 8th day, which is, well, in Leviticus. So you have 7 days, and you see 7, and then we know is the 8th. There's not 6 and then the 7th, like we see over here, as I was talking about earlier. These are exact prophetic pictures of days as years to the end of days. And so I don't even believe in, at least in my mind, in the revelation that I understand, there's no doubt in my mind that pre-trib is connected to true Feast of Weeks, whether whether it's the count from Nissan or the count from Savan, true Feast of Weeks is the time of the pre-trib. It's connected just like Enoch was. That unleavened bread is when the great multitude rapture in the midst of the 7th year is going to be observed, and the 7 years of trumpets, the 6th and the 7th, which is the destruction, the vengeance of the Lord, and then the new beginning, when those who were taken into the wilderness at mid-trumpets will then be brought back, and they all get their divisions of land, exactly like we shared in the last video. That goes to Ezekiel, starts with 47, when he'll renew the earth at that point, after he's destroyed them, renews and replenishes the earth from the water going out from the temple. And these guys come back in. And what do you see at the end of 47 of Ezekiel into 48? You then see them all getting their portion of their land. They're promised, which will be at a Jubilee, which will be at the Jubilee. And that only lines up with this in this year count. It can't be more than a couple of years. And that's why we can take great comfort in knowing this, that I know we want sooner, but I'll speak for myself in this. You guys can say something as well, but to know that we have this give or take year now, like 8 months or so, but that we have this period of time now, we can seek him. We can spend time with him. We're not always on the edge of our seat, event after event. That caused a lot of distress. And sadly, that's what happens as watchmen. It's not, here or there, whether it's good or bad. It's just what tends to happen as your watchman, because we want to be aware of the seasons and times that he's coming. We want to be diligently seeking him. We want to be watching and praying. We can still do all those things without now having to be unnerved. Does it mean that if it were to happen at Hanukkah, does it mean you won't be ready? No. It just means you don't have to be so on edge. You can live and watch and pray and strengthen and encourage and diligently seek him without having to be on edge all the time, thinking if I'm not praying for a few hours, if I'm not watching because I've got to go to the soccer practice, I got to go to the kids' hockey game. Some people feel guilt, like, oh, I should be what? No, we're living this life. He's given us this life. And so we can take this time to take a deep breath and enjoy seeking him and seeing his revelation continue to be revealed and go deeper and deeper. And that's what we'll go into in the next little bit. If you guys have any questions, anything you want to share, questions on things that are past, things that maybe you might be newer and you want to understand, or, after that, I can always go into the beast from the second 2 videos ago and the revelation of the beast, because I know when something's new, it's always a little bit harder to track and to follow at first, but it will become very clear. And I can hit on the main points to hopefully make it crystal clear for everybody. So if anybody has any questions, ask away, and we'll go from there. Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Nobody? Anybody want to say hello? Hey, it looks like we've got a new name in there. Oh, Roy, your mic is broken. That's one way to get out of it. Roy's a good brother. We talk regularly on the phone too. So, all right. We've got Pete in here as well. So who is...
Let's see if this works. Does this work?
Hey, there you go. Oh, there you are, Roy.
Yeah. So you made I just want to point out two quick things. That when you were doing your counts, you ended up on August 1st, which is Loafmas.
That's right.
You ended exactly on Loafmas in 2024,
But
which
that was the end of the 50.
yes, right.
Yeah.
Yes. And the
That
fact that
yeah.
when you were doing the calendar, you were doing a wraparound. So 2024 is the beginning of the year, and it extends through, excuse me, 2023 starts the year and it wraps
That's right.
around to 2024. So we're still in that same year. You know, it's not like we're pushing things out, you know.
Yeah.
It,
So obviously in a Tishri to Tishri, that's right. So we're going from or trumpets, Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets. So that's
exactly.
2023. You got it, to 2024.
So
And
it's kind of confusing and it's very awkward to conceptualize because we're in a Gregorian,
that's right.
mindset. But the year just started for us from a Hebrew perspective.
That's right.
So there's a lot of time left.
Yeah. There's a lot of time, and it's easy to see how we can get confused, because here we were talking about the year just began at Tishri, right, at the Feast of Trumpets. And in the midst of talking, we're talking about Gregorian calendar, and Gregorian begins in January. And I'm talking
Exactly.
about how in the new year, I'm going to share more about the first point of a potential count. So I can see how it's confusing, because we're in Gregorian years. However, the cycles go, I believe, on the Hebrew calendar. And the reason I believe it is because of the constellations when the sun and the moon are moving through them. And you know, when you see that, even when I was on the calendar, let me hello, brother Neil.
Hi, Alan.
I'll share it on the calendar just to to help people really see what we're talking about. I'll try to make it clear. So here we are in 2023. The year began on the 16th of September 2023. That was Tishri 1. We are, of course, right now the 28th of November and the 15th of Kislev. We're following it around. So now we're in the new Gregorian year of 2024. They've got the second Adar to adjust for the moons throughout the years. And there's your Nisan, late March into May. And when we do a count from Nisan to the true to a potential Feast of Weeks, the real count brings you to the seventh Sabbath, which is the 8th of Sivan. And like I said, this is something we'll talk a little bit more when we come into the new Gregorian year. And you all know that have been following at least for a little bit that August 12th is where I believe it will actually take place, because I don't believe the count will begin for the 7 Sabbaths to the 50 that will follow. I don't believe it's going to begin from Nisan. I believe it's starting as it was in the beginning, which takes us from Taurus, which is the month of Sivan, when the sun is in Taurus. And when we do that, it gives us a perfect 50 days from a first attack to the Holy Ghost. It gives us wheat. And so what Roy was talking about is that if this were the escape, because the escape happens right before the 50 days begins, and this is the beginning of the 50 days, I think the 50 days, I think this is actually to the end of, when I showed August 1st, this is actually to the end of the 40 days of the Son of Man, if that were the count. And it would bring us to the 29th of Tammuz, would be the end of 50 days. But the pre-trib doesn't happen at the end of 50 days. The pre-trib happens at the beginning of the 50 days. And it's connected to wheat, as we saw with the wheat harvest with bread and leaven. So those two loaves with leaven, there is no wheat that's harvested and ready in winter wheat being harvested in June. It might just be the early time where the harvest starts. But the way the feasts work is only the first fruits of barley is brought in while it's still those green ears of corn. When it comes to the first fruits of the wheat harvest, when loaves are baked with leaven, the 2 loaves baked with leaven, they don't take it from wheat that's been harvested early in the beginning of the harvest of the wheat. It doesn't happen until late July into this early-ish time of August. This is the time when the winter wheat harvest comes to an end, and then they bake they have crushed it to flour, They have it with leaven, and they bake the loaves of bread. And this, we're even told this in Deuteronomy. So it doesn't happen at the beginning like the first fruits without leaven takes place. And so when we understand that and we follow the cycles with the harvest, we end up with the count right here to the seventh Sabbath, and then the beginning of 50 days that begins here. And this just so happens to be the time frame, the literal time frame of when the end of the winter wheat harvest is ready. And then what happens is we follow those 50 days. It ends on the 29th of Elul, and it just so happens this is literally when new wine is made at the time of the end of the wheat harvest, at the end of the grape harvest, when they're making new wine, which is directly connected to Pentecost in what we call Acts 2.0. And what do we know happens at the end of Pentecost? The attack by Syria. Syria has compassed them about in the last 3 days, and then they're destroyed at the Feast of Trumpets. A replay, a typology of what happened with Ishmael and Gedaliah and all of that. And it's in the exact same 50-day period. And this is why Mark and Matthew's discourses both have the day and hour no one knows. Because starting at the Feast of Trumpets for the 14 years, 6 years later, when the Lord comes at the end of 6 years of seals, has the Ezekiel 39 war and destroyed the enemies, what do we know that seventh year is? That seventh year is the solemn assembly. So everything happened in the 6 days of 6 years, and then the solemn assembly. So what is it going to be exactly 6 years later? Feast of Trumpets. The day and hour no one knows. That's why it's in Mark's discourse. But you'll notice Mark doesn't say, as it was in the days of Noah. That's because this isn't related to that final year being as it was in the days of Noah. This is that seventh day as year of unleavened bread with the solemn assembly. And then when that year is done and trumpets begins, it's going to begin a year later, which is going to be Feast of Trumpets. So when the 7 years of trumpets begins, it begins a Feast of Trumpets. And when the 6 years of trumpets come to an end, and then the Lord returns feet down on the Mount of Olives, what did it say in Matthew's discourse? The day and hour no one knows. So when is it going to be? The day and hour no one knows, Feast of Trumpets, at the end of 6 years of trumpets, or 13 years of total tribulation. But in his, he says, it'll be as it was in the days of Noah, which means that devastation and that year that is a year and 10 days long. So what happens during that year and 10 days? It's the great wine press of the wrath of the Lord. It's the Luke 4. It's him defeating Satan and binding him in chains. It's after the 70 years, which will have completed here at the end of the 13 years. And this is the beginning of the 14th year. He's feet down. He brings the devastation, the great treading of the winepress, the year of his wrath. And what happens after that 1 year? There's 10 more days, as it was in the days of Noah, because on the Day of Atonement, only in the 49th year of these 7-year counts, which the 14th year of tribulation is, the final 7 years of a 49 years, they sound the shofar and pronounce the Jubilee at the end of that 14 years, 10 days later. So now all those people that were taken on the wings of an eagle at mid-trumpets, when the final 14th year is over, plus the 10 days for their atonement, these guys now start coming back, making their journey back, and they're going to receive their land like Ezekiel 48. It's awesome that we can understand this, that we can track it. But guess what? All of these things were connected to the Feast of Trumpets. So if we were counting from a Nissan count and doing the 7 Sabbaths and getting to where the world would put Feast of Weeks, they put it over here, but, in this range, but really it would be here. It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. There is no harvest of wheat where it's ready. And 50 days later, there is no harvest of grapes yet. It doesn't exist at any point until counting from Sivan, which is Taurus, as it was in the beginning, and making the count through to exactly an attack 1, followed with the historical attack 2. Everything falls in line. And so that's why, as much as we will still look for a Nissan to Savan count, I believe with all of my heart it's the Savan to go into Tishri count. So one way or the other,
Yeah.
yes, we are in the year. In the Hebrew year, we are already in it. And we've got, what, 8 months or somewhere around there to go. So not too bad. And we've got our brother Neil here in the forum. He does,
Yeah.
he'll do
258 days to go.
How many today?
258.
That's funny.
258.
City
So
escape and yeah.
Wow.
There's one
Subtract
thing I was
50.
wanting
258 to our pre-trib date. What's that, Deborah?
There's one thing I was wanting to bring up. This morning, I haven't had really time to look into it, but this morning I heard someone I was listening to mention that right before, in 70 AD, right before Israel was destroyed, the Christians were forewarned and they fled, and no Christians were killed when the destruction happened. So that's another type and shadow that I haven't heard of before. That's, I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of interesting. They fled to Pella, and it's I was just now looking it up, and I mean, they were talking about all the Christians were prophetically forewarned to flee, and just
Yeah.
like, you know, we're going to be taken out prior to this all happening all over again.
That's right. That's right.
Another fractal.
He warns his people, you know. Exactly. It's a fractal, right? He warns his people, man. And that's what we've been doing for 7 years. Other watchmen are doing it. They just don't have the revelation, but they're trying with what they understand. So I
I
don't
was trying to find,
I
does it
don't beat
actually
them for
say
that.
anywhere in the Bible where it was actually destroyed in 70 AD? What is going on behind me? I don't know what happened there.
That was
Does it
cool.
actually say?
Yeah, that was
I don't
pretty
know
good.
what I did. Does it actually say when it was destroyed in 70 AD, or it was just all prophecy and it was just in other historical documents?
When they were destroyed in 70 AD?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's all in the history records, and we see
That's what I
70
was
all
wondering.
throughout with prophecy. And
Well, sure, yeah, with prophecy,
yeah,
but I just didn't know if it was an actual account of it. I didn't think there was
there's
in the
no actual
Bible.
account in the scriptures
Yeah.
that it would happen in 70. But you know, I what possibly had happened is they had an understanding because of 70 years. But when I look at that, I've always found it very interesting because they were already in the land for what, 400 something years. They were already in Jerusalem. They already had the temple for a few hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always funny to see, well, it was the 70th year. Well,
Yeah.
the only way it was the 70th year is if you're counting from year 1 in a Gregorian calendar and you go to 70 AD. You see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
Because where are you counting it from? Where was the historical record counting that, oh, it was 70 years for them?
Yeah, yeah.
There was no 70. They were in a Julian calendar. There was no Gregorian calendar in 70 AD. They were in the Julian calendar. So there was no switching from a BC to an AD. They were just continuing. So to them, it wasn't the 70th year. When they were in the land, when this had happened, it was not the 70th year. They were, I think, if I remember correctly, 400 and something years. Maybe it was 300 and something, but it was 300 to 400 and something years that they had been in the land with the temple. So it's really interesting how that gets worked into our history, because they go back from the connection to Christ and say, see, it was 70 AD. But you only get that if you take a Gregorian calendar and say, we started the new count from Jesus, his birth. But when you go into Jesus's birth, you know what happens? It wasn't 70 AD.
Yeah.
Because Jesus wasn't born on year 1. You see what
Yeah,
happens?
I was just, yeah, and I was just,
was
this thing that I had just looked up, it mentions Aquila, And but then it says something here. It says it was revealed in advance to all the disciples by an angel of God that they should remove from the city as it was going to be completely destroyed. And I just thought that was interesting too. That it mentioned Aquila in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just thought that out there.
It's one of those things I'm sure maybe some of you have thought of it as well, but I would get a little bit kind of jealous sometimes, right? Because all the Old Testament, the Lord spoke to them, the Lord walked with them, they had visions clear, the angels visiting them. You had the New Testament, they had Christ, they had this anointing come upon them and the Lord visiting. I mean, you had all these things and we don't, you know. So, but I always
Maybe
love it.
we
I'm
do,
always
but there's just so much noise that we can't decipher what's
yes,
what.
yeah, and it's not discounting that people don't have dreams and don't have
Mhm.
visions,
Mhm.
but that same type of absolute knowing of authority being given like that, there are events like that, but in relation to how it's given to us in Scripture, because it was important for us to know for future, as we are here in this future that's about to begin, we don't have that.
But they didn't
There is
have the
nobody
Bible. They
clearly
didn't have
understanding it.
e-swords. They didn't
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
So it's
I'm
a
always
trade-off, I
I'm
guess.
always reminded of like what Ivan would say. Ivan said this maybe like 3 years ago, and it always stuck with me. He said, "That's because we're in this period of faith, right?" They had them all talking with them in the
Right.
Old
Yeah.
Testament. He was here in the New, and for the latter portion going into the is to come, it's all been through faith, and there's great reward for faith, and we all know that. So, you know, I'm comforted when that happens, because in all of this, when we sit and I'll say for myself, and I sit and I ponder it sometimes, and I'm always so amazed and blown away by it all. But then I think about it, and it's like it was all done in faith. It's all done in faith that I'm understanding it. But then it comes over me, and it's like it's not even really faith anymore. Come on, how many do you need to connect to show hundreds and hundreds of places in Scripture to show that it all lines up? You don't need faith. It's obvious now, right? I have shown you. My daughter used to she'd be like a little smart aleck with me, but doing it in a nice way, to say, he does talk to you, Dad. He reveals it through Scripture. I'm like, shut up, you little smart butt. But yeah, it's an exciting time. It's and even taking it back, like you were saying, going to the fractal of it all. When we take this back to the fractal, and we look at even the count of the fractal, and how that gap theory can be counted. Is the gap theory really telling us just the 50 days above? Or is the gap theory showing us the 7-day wedding, and then in verse 3, when he becomes light, is when he starts his 40 days? Is it showing us, or is it showing us the count from the beginning of the 7 Sabbaths? You see, let me show this. I'll spend a few minutes in this, since it was something we were just touching on. For new people, I would recommend going to either look on the YouTube channel videos, or go to ministryrevealed.com, go to the intro page, and watch the video. As long as you've watched the understanding of the Gospels and the 14 years, go scroll all the way down to the bottom of the intro page and watch It's All a Fractal. That will blow your mind. So what happens here in the revelation of the fractal? So we know through theologians and all of this study that's gone on over the centuries, that Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 are what's called gap theory. And what most people do is they put this in the category, like scientists and all these guys, they'll put this in the category against Christians to say, this is when the dinosaurs were created. This can account, because we don't know how long this creation took. This could account for the millions and millions or billions of years. Well, it's not. We were able to prove it through the revelation of the Gospels, which proved through the book of Revelation, which proved through the Hebrew alphabet, that it's the story of 21 years and the 22nd in the end of days. It's a story of to the Lord 7 days, 7 days, 7 days for 777. And the final Jubilee is the one, which is what? The menorah. We see that it's also to us, if man was there in the dimension of time, this gap theory would have been 7,000 years. In the creation of days that come next, starting in verse 3, you have 6 days to the 7th day of creation. And what do we have in that? To the Lord, it's a day. Each one is a day. But if we were there in the dimension of time, it would have been as 1,000 years each. So we're seeing 7,000 years, but you have to understand the gap playing out as 7,000 in a typology if we were there in time, but you can understand it through revelation of other parts of Scripture. The days are really clear from 2 Peter 3:8 that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years. And then he says 1,000 years is as a day. Why is he repeating it and repeating in reverse? Because each day to the Lord is a day, but to us, each one would have been as 1,000 in the dimension of time. Then we go to chapter 2 of Revelation, and we see the thousands now starting from Adam, and the thousands of years begin. But to the Lord, each of these thousands is still as a day. So in the dimension of time, it would have been 7,000, 7,000, 7,000, and the 22nd, which would have been the new beginning. It's the whole picture is 22,000 or 21,000 and 22nd thousand, the new beginning. And to the Lord, though, 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, and the new beginning. To the end of days, it's the revelation of the 7 easy years, like Jacob to Leah, even though he was expecting Rachel, 7 more years. Then 6 makes the covenant. He fulfills that final 7th. And then the 22nd, which is the final Jubilee, or in the 14 years, it's the 15th, and it's the final Jubilee. The entire thing is a fractal. And so in this gap theory, in what we've shared, it's either one of these in relation to how it gives us a picture of the is to come. As I was just saying, each of these 7 is a picture of the 7 years of easy years, then the 7 years of seals, 7 years of trumpets. So knowing this is a prophetic picture, but we only get 2 verses, what are we to understand, and how can we understand what these 2 verses are telling us about those who are the sons of God, who have the Spirit of God in them, like Romans told us? So this is all related to the pre-trib Luke group, Spirit-filled, pre-trib going, and a remnant group who will remain to serve him. And one of the keys for me has always been this: in the beginning. And the reason this was so important is because the word beginning is Jesus's name. The beginning, first, chiefest. What is this word for beginning? 72:25. And we remembered it from past teachings that it's Leviticus chapter 23, which equals first fruits. And let's prove it. You shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest. This is the barley. And where is it brought to? The first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. What is it? 72:25. So Jesus is the first fruits of this harvest. He is the only one without leaven. It can be nobody else but him, because he's the only one without sin. So when we go back to Genesis, and we know all throughout Scripture, like Revelation says it, 4 times, that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the Aleph and the Tav. He is the beginning. So when I say the word beginning means Jesus, it means Jesus. He is the only one without leaven, right? Without sin. He is the first fruits of the Feast of First Fruits. He is the beginning, which means in Jesus, God created. So this was Jesus giving everything to create, and it was given to him by the Father. That's what's going on. So when we take this, knowing that this is a prophetic typology of the Luke group, And it's the picture of the 7,000 or the 7 easy years. We also know that, like Jacob, those first 7 flew by, he says, like days. So it's fantastic that it said that, because this is just a short period that is given to us in 2 verses. So the question is, does it represent just the 50 days above the 14 years that would begin at day 1? Or is it the 7 Sabbaths and then the 50 days? And that's what the question has been. So if we take the beginning, and we know we've gone through this a lot in the past, we know that in the beginning, the sun began the year in Taurus. So this, we haven't spoke on it in a little bit, but we've talked about it a lot. And so if it's going back to as it was in the beginning, and in the beginning it was Taurus, and the beginning is what? Well, the Feast of First Fruits is the 16th day of the first month. Well, that would mean if the beginning was Taurus, which it was, and the Jews and all their documents talk about it, we've shared on that, and the beginning means Feast of First Fruits, then that means this creation in the beginning was in the constellation of Taurus on the 16th day. So when we go to this on the 2024 calendar for next year, and we go to, where am I? And we go to the 16th day of Taurus, we end up right here, the 16th day, which is now the 3rd month, called Sivan. So if we come from here, the question would be, well, could this have been that the escape was here, and then this is connected to Christ creating everything in the beginning and his 40 days starting as the Son of Man? It doesn't line up, because why would the escape be here? He comes back from the wedding, and then it starts on the 16th. It doesn't really line up, and I'll show you why. Because the word beginning is what? The word beginning equals the Feast of First Fruits. So if it equals the Feast of First Fruits, and we know from the count of Feast of First Fruits is when you begin to count 7 Sabbaths, and in the beginning of creation, it was in Taurus on the 16th day in Taurus, represented as the Feast of First Fruits. If we go to the calendar and we're in Taurus, which is Sivan, and we go to the 16th day of the month of Taurus, even though it's the 3rd month now, it was the 1st month, and it goes back to as it was in the beginning. When we do this count, we end up with the Sabbaths, the true Sabbaths. We got the 15th. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So when we do a count from the 1st month as it was in the beginning, from the constellation of Taurus, and we go from the Feast of First Fruits, which is Christ, we end up on the 16th of Sivan on a Hebrew calendar year. And from that, why we're counting 7 Sabbaths still is because it was the Feast of First Fruits. So we got to count 7 Sabbaths from there, which is it's always the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of every month. So it was at the 16th. So we go to the 22nd, 29th, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, the 29th, the 8th. And where does that bring us? It brings us to the 8th of Av. So the 8th of Av would be the end of the 7 Sabbaths. So at the 7th Sabbath, what happens according to Deuteronomy 16? That's bringing to the Lord. That's the time of the feast and the observing and the bringing to the Lord. And what do we know comes after it is 50 days. And that 50 days is the count that the escape takes place. We know there's a 7-day wedding in heaven, and the Lord will return on the 8th day to begin the fulfillment of the Son of Man that's to come for 40 days. So what happens now is, if we go back to Genesis chapter 1 and we look at this, we could see this as the count that takes us from in Taurus, starting on the 16th day, to beginning a 7 Sabbath count. And when that Sabbath count is done, that's when the pre-trib escape goes, because it's at the feast of first fruits of the wheat harvest, which is winter wheat, and it's the feast of the Lord. It's the 7 of unleavened bread, the 1, and the 7 of tabernacles. So you got 7, 1, 7, but it begins at 1, like Jesus being the middle on the cross. And so that's where this takes us. Then you've got the 7-day wedding that takes place in heaven. When the Lord returns on the 8th day, 7 days after the 50 days have started, he's coming back on the 8th day. What's he coming to be? He's coming as light. He's coming to shed his light on the earth, but especially to the disciples. He's coming to warn, as he said he would do, like Jonah, but he's also coming to shed his light on these remnant disciple workers who are part of those with the Spirit of God, who he's going to shed his light. That's why you see it in John 8. That's why we see it in Luke 11, after the story of him being as Jonah was. It's like 7 different versions of the word light. It's all about his shedding his light, light, light. Why? Because this is when he was made light. Jesus was now the Word and spoke everything. And then what happened? He was made light, which means all of these beings in this creation here, they were light beings, and they were corrupted. They got corrupted by fallen light beings, corrupted this group of males and females that were created at this time. And this is the group that is the quote unquote typology that represents the house of Israel. And when they were corrupted, this is the same typology from the was to the is to come, the ones that he came to save. That's why when Jesus came, he said, I've come not but for the house of Israel. And the Gentiles, of course, are grafted in with them. So when he's coming during the time of 40 days to shed his light, he's not coming to save this group. This group was already in Christ's Spirit filled. They're gone. And a group from them is being chosen to remain, to stay with him, to receive his light when he returns after the wedding. And they're going to go and spread that light with the anointing that they'll receive from him and from the Holy Ghost on the 50th day. And then what do you have? Day 1, day 2, day 3, like the 6 to the 7 years of seals. And who's being saved in this period? The light beings, the beings that are the picture of the original in this creation of days, that were the light beings who, when he came, he was coming to shed his light so that they could have the what? The light of the Lord. So who do you think they were? Light beings. They were the ones created in light, and they got corrupted. And this is what brings us to the difference. And Roy was asking me about this earlier today. It brings us to where the world in church, because they only see through Matthew's eyes, even though they don't realize it, they think that Antichrist and Satan are the same person. Well, it's impossible, because when you go to Revelation 16, we see in Revelation 16, verse 14, 13, we see at the bowl judgments, it says, and I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. 3 beings. Everybody will tell you that the Antichrist is the beast. Correct. Everybody will tell you, well, the false prophet is the false prophet. Correct. Well, then who's the dragon? If the dragon is the Antichrist beast, then there should only be 2 frogs coming out of 2 beings. But there are 3 frogs coming out of 3 beings.
And the beast gets its power from the dragon.
That's right. And his beast, the beast gets his power from the dragon, as we see in Revelation 13. So we know that there are 3 beings, or people that will be possessed, or however that plays out. We know that there's 3 people or beings. And this is why when you start to understand this, you can understand that there are three beings in heaven, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, because they're all there in verse 1 and 2 in the beginning of creation. Jesus is the beginning. God is the one that gave everything to the beginning, which is Jesus, to create it all. And then it says in verse 2 that the Spirit of God. So all three of them are there, the Son, the Father, and the Spirit, because they're copying, they're mimicking everything. So we know that during seals, it's the beast, right? The Antichrist and the false prophet at mid seals. Well, what happened in the beginning of creation? Or in the light portion of creation of days? Well, a group fell, right? Created in their likeness, and they ended up falling. And we know this from Romans, because Romans said they didn't know, these light beings didn't know that they were being corrupted because they didn't know any better. So we know that it's the created light beings that got corrupted. Well, who corrupted them? Well, we know that the sun, so the typology of the sun, which would be Lucifer, and the typology of the moon, which would be the false prophet, in the typology fell. So we know this, right? We know that the planets represent those angels that fell. They're a typology of the fallen angels that corrupted the people. And they were put into utter darkness, right? In chains and everlasting darkness. Well, the planets have, those planets have fallen, so they're a typology of it, but so did the sun and so did the moon, because the sun and the moon are supposed to be in the firmament, but they're not. And what happened with the sun? This is what we were talking about earlier when you connect it to the beginning. In the beginning of creation, Taurus, which is now Sivan, was the first month. Now it's the third month. So if it was the first and now it's the third, we know the sun has gone off course. It is sped up by 2 months. We now know that the moon is off by about, I think, 11 and a quarter or so days per year. So we know that the moon throws off the calendars every year. We know that the sun is off by 2 months. So what do we have in this prophetic picture? We end up getting a picture of the sun and the moon that have fallen since, a picture of the false prophet or the Antichrist, and which is the beast, and a prophetic picture of the false prophet. So we've got Lucifer and his counterpart, or his sidekick, false prophet, that with those that fell with them corrupted this created image, who are light beings. Which is why when Christ came, the prophetic picture in the was the house of Israel, was this creation of his that were light beings that fell, and they needed to be brought back to the light. What's happening during tribulation of seals? The same prophetic picture. Beast is here, false prophet. He's going to try to corrupt them some more, totally end that portion, and Christ comes at the end. And we know the great multitude rapture is the light being, the typology of those who were light beings in the end of days, who are, yes, in fleshly form, that will receive the light of the Lord in the salvation in their last final effort. It's the end of days. That's the prophetic picture. And we see this by going into Ezekiel 28. Some people have seen this, but a lot of people have missed it. We see that this one who had such beautiful brightness, right? Who had all of this power and this authority, we know that he was what? The anointed cherub that covers. Well, what a lot of people didn't realize or don't understand is that there are angels around Jesus's throne as well. And those that are around Jesus's throne are called cherubim. These are the cherubim that are around the throne of Christ. And the head one that fell from that is Lucifer. And he was the anointed cherub. You see, and he was white. He had the brightness, right? So he's that prophetic picture of the sun, and his sidekick is the prophetic picture of the moon that fell with them. And the planets are a prophetic picture of those planets that are fallen, that are in utter darkness, that are not staying. Because you see, everything should have stayed with the constellations. Everything should be moving accordingly. But now only the constellations, those angels, and that have kept their first authority, right? Their first place, whereas the other ones came down from it. So when you look at the constellations and the stars, they haven't moved. They've kept their first, I keep forgetting that word, but they kept their first place, whereas the other ones have fallen. So that's the picture that you're getting from it. Now, when we go back to Genesis, and you understand now that the one who corrupted these light beings is the prophetic picture of Lucifer or Antichrist and false prophet, you get this picture then of Antichrist and false prophet during the time of seals, when Christ is saying at the beginning of the 40 days, he's coming to shed his light and to give his light to some of the spirit workers who will receive that light and the anointing of the Holy Ghost to go and shed that light on this prophetic typology group during seals, who is the house of Israel. So you see what's playing out. And who was it? It was the covered cherubim, the anointed cherubim, who was Lucifer. But Lucifer isn't Satan. And a lot of people have missed that. When you go to Genesis chapter 2, after the 7th day or 7,000th year, or the 7th year of seals, which is the rest, you now see the garden is there, right? There's the garden, which is heavenly Mount Zion having come down at the end of seals. And we know that the great multitude rapture, which is that light being group, is going to paradise. And now what we see is Adam and then Eve created. They're made of the dust of the earth. And what begins? Well, you've now got the years that are in time, which are thousands of years. And who ends up coming and corrupting Eve, who then follows for Eve? You've got the serpent who comes. Who's the serpent? The serpent, who is the Nakash, who is the hissing snake, is he the one, was he part of the cherubim that are around the throne of Christ? You see, Antichrist wants to come against Christ and to take away everything that's his and to be above Christ. Satan wants to try to take away everything from the Father and be above the Father. And he's doing that by giving his authority in the time of trumpets. When the pit is open, Satan's cast down and the pit is open, we know that the beast Antichrist comes back, and it's the beast Antichrist who's going to go sit in there as if his father, Satan, gave him the authority, you see? And so what are we seeing here? Is a serpent, is it a covering cherub? Is it Lucifer? No, it's Satan. So what is Satan, and where did Satan come from? If he's not one of the cherubim around Jesus's throne, where is he from? Well, we find this out in Isaiah chapter 6, that the seraphim, look at what it says, Isaiah 6, starting in verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon the throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim, not the cherubim, the seraphim. Each one had six wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. Cried, singing, holy, holy, holy. So who are the seraphim? Let's have a look. We know that they're covering the throne of the Lord, but is it the throne of Jesus? No, those are the cherubim. So if the cherubim is Lucifer, and there's a serpent who is Satan, who are the seraphim? Well, if Satan is the serpent, what is a seraphim? Let's have a look. Poisonous serpent, fiery serpent. The cherubim are the seraphim, are the fiery serpents. They're the ones around the throne of the Father. So you've got the ones around the throne of Christ. You've got the ones around the throne of the Father. You've got the most powerful one around the throne of the Father who comes down, and you've got the most powerful one, or one of the powerful ones, from the throne of Christ, and they think that together they're going to take over Christ's position and they're going to take over the Father's position. This is exactly what we're seeing. So who is the fiery poisonous serpent? Well, he's not Lucifer, he's Satan. And so when we come to the creation now of the thousands, which to the Lord are still as days, but to us, we're now in the dimension of time and it's thousands, who was the one that corrupted them? Satan. So when we go to the end of days, and we know that Antichrist shows up about 2.5 years into the 14 years, about 2.5 years into seals, give or take, and false prophet and Antichrist show up, and then he has 42 months, which brings you to the end of 6 years. Then who shows up on heavenly Mount Zion, which is paradise, which is what you see at the beginning of the next 7, which begins the 1,000, when they were created like Adam and Eve in paradise. Now what do you see? Well, Jesus has now killed the Antichrist. He's now gone into the pit, not the lake of fire, but he's now destroyed and in the pit. And what happens? Messiah is going to have about 3.5 years, plus he was here for the 7th year of seals, but he's here for 3.5 years. The city and the street and the temple are being rebuilt. And now we're in the 7 years or the 7,000 that represent the time of Adam and the flesh of thousands. And what happens here? Satan shows up. Satan is cast down. And so what does Satan do? Here was your cherubim time. Here is your seraphim time. And what's going to happen? Satan is cast down. The pit is opened. The beast comes back. And who's the one that goes into the temple? It's not Satan. It's the beast. Because Satan, who is the greater one in authority, who's going to play godlike, is giving the authority to his quote unquote son to mimic it so that people will worship the beast and Satan during the time of the 2.5 years that they have. During the 2.5 years that they have, wait a second, right here, that they have before the Lord, having been cut off, returns feet down to fulfill that final year. And you can clearly see it in the 3 beings that had frogs come out of them. But where else do you see it? In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we see the time of the great falling away, because even though now we're in the Laodicean age, soon as the pre-trib escape happens, the 7 churches will begin over again in the 14 years of the end of days. So they played out over thousands of years. In the end, they'll play out over 50 days and 14 years. So Laodicea, this falling away, which is connected to the son of perdition, is the time of mid-trumpets, when Messiah is cut off and Satan is cast down, like Revelation 12 says. The pit is open. The Antichrist comes back. The beast comes back. And all 3 of them, the false Christ, the false prophet, and Satan, are now there. And what do we see? He's now going to go into the temple and declare himself to be God. Well, who's doing it? The son of perdition. The son of perdition isn't Satan. It isn't the seraphim Satan, the one who's taking God's position, trying to take God's position. It's actually the beast, who is the false prophet, Lucifer, who is the cherubim, who's trying to take over Jesus's place and be as if Satan, as Lucifer's father, is giving them the authority for it. That's the beings, that's the devils that take over these people. And it's an exact mimic, a copy of what the Father is doing in the Son, that Satan is going to do with Lucifer. It's the same story. And that's why you have the false prophet, and we've got the Holy Ghost. They're trying to twist it all about. And when we go to Revelation 17, you see this in the was, is not, and shall be. So we know that the beast that thou sawest was, because he's there for the second half of seals for 42 months to the end of the 6th year. Then he is not, because he's killed when the Lord comes on heavenly Mount Zion, and then shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. The only way that can happen is if he was here during Seal's 42 months, then he's not during the first half of trumpets because he was killed, and the rebuilding of the city and the streets and the temple take place while the Lord is there on Zion. And then he's cut off because Satan is cast down. The pit is open. He comes back from the pit and everything else that comes back from the pit. And there's your was, your is, and your is to come. So you know that the son of perdition from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 has nothing to do with pre-trib. It is at the mid-trib of at the midpoint of trumpets, which is about 10 and a half years in to the 14 years of tribulation. It's not even maybe, we can clearly see it. So you see how this all a fractal, this whole thing is a fractal in this prophetic picture playing out. But in the spirit creation of those first two verses in creation, there was no enemy. There was there's no anything spoken negative against them. And that's exactly what we see in Luke's gospel. There's never anything spoken negative in Luke about them not doing this. Why couldn't you do this? But you see it in Mark and you see it in Matthew. You see it in the creation of days, and you see it in the creation of thousands. It's such a fractal, a picture within a smaller picture, within a smaller picture. It's just a repeat playing out. And this is the end of it. Yeah, like Deborah says, just there's no way this could be understood without first having spent a lot of time understanding that the differences in the Gospels is where it all begins. And then when you understand that, you can understand there are different portions of time, and their discourses make it very clear. Pre and a small period of time, mid after seals, post after trumpets. And when you understand that time frame, this all starts to open up, and it's just mind-boggling. And what we did in the second to last video was this conversation about the sorry, I'm just trying to get something out of my way here. Was the conversation about now the mystery, not of Babylon, this mystery Babylon. I'm still a little tongue twisted or mind twisted in it, but we'll get there because I want to understand the timing in it. But the beast is pretty awesome now. You see, we find out that in Revelation 7:17, so I'll go through this part now. I'm not going to do full video length on it, but I'm going to hit the key points to help people understand that we're a little bit mind twisted trying to follow all the details that I had put in the second last video. I'll hit the key points. What we find out is that there's the woman and the beast that carries her. Okay. This beast that carries her has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was, is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Okay. We know who he is. He's the beast that was, is not, and shall be. He has 7 heads and he has 10 horns. Now, in verse 9 of Revelation 17, it says, here's the mind that has wisdom. Excuse me, the 7 heads are 7 mountains. So the beast, this Antichrist beast, has 7 heads. And those 7 heads are represented by 7 mountains. And those 7 mountains are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the one that's to come is going to have a very short space, is going to continue a short space. And this word means puny. So it's going to be a very short period of time. And then we read, and the beast that was, which is 42 months, and is not, which is the first half of trumpets because he was killed at the end of seals, even he is the 8th. Well, wait a second. If he only had 7 heads, how can he be the 8th? There's only 7 heads. Well, the answer comes to us by reading the rest of it that says, and is of the 7, which means if there were only 7 heads and they've now died off, for him to be the 8th, he has to be from the 7. So he's going to come up from one of the 7. But when it says of the 7, it means that those 7 are part of this kingdom with the beast, because the beast of whatever kingdom he's got has 7 mountains, which are 7 kings. And when he comes, he himself is representing all of them in one, which is the 8 that comes from the 7. So this 8, for which it can't be 8 because there were only 7 heads, means when that 7th one is done only that short period of time, that means out of that one, the 8th one is coming. So it's still it's still from the 7, but he's now the 8th guy on the scene. So how can we understand this? How can we have any clue to what this means in relation to mountains? Now, like you and even like myself over the years, we've thought it was Rome. Rome had, Rome, 7 hills, and, you count all that out. But we're not in Roman times anymore. We know that the end of days, you see, there were no Muslims in the Roman days. We're talking about is to come. And in the is to come, it's Muslim. It's all the Antichrist is an Arab and is Muslim. It's going to be their time to rise for a short period. And we know this throughout Scripture. It's revealed in Scripture. We know the beast is the symbol of Bisma Allah, they say, right? Whatever that means to Allah. It's the actual mark of the beast. And we know it's all Arab. We know it's connected to them. And so when we follow this, we got to say, okay, well, he's Arab, but how is he from 7 heads or from the 7th and become the 8th? Well, the key is knowing that the 7 heads are mountains. And then where it all blew me away was going to Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7, we see the first 3 beasts, which are not him, but he is the 4th beast. And he's exceedingly terrible and teeth and stamps the residue with his feet. And what do we see? That he has 10 horns. Well, that's interesting. There's no more mention about his heads. And when we went to Revelation 13, when he has this power that he's going to get to continue 42 months, we see that had 7 heads and 10 horns, but the crowns are no more on the heads of the seven mountains. So we know that the 7 heads are 7 mountains and 7 kings. There's no longer the crowns on the 7 heads, but they're now on the 10 horns, which means what? Which means he's now taken his position as the 8th that has come up from the 7th. Now we can understand that. We can understand that from Revelation connected into here. But we still didn't have enough understanding of where it fit in the timeline of it being Muslims and Arab. Where did it fit in this timeline of Media and Persia and Grecia, which also means Arab? And this is important to understand that Grecia also means Arabia. So in the past, it didn't. In history, the real connection was to Rome and all up through that area. But in the years to come, it's going to be Arab. So the fact that it's Arabia was so incredible. And when we saw this and continued into Daniel chapter 8, this was the end game here. We saw that there was a ram that had 2 horns. Then we saw the ram that had 2 horns came against a goat that had 1 horn. Well, if you didn't have a program like eSword that we have, and you were to go back to Daniel 7, and you saw that the 10 horns, well, you would see horns. And it's the word 7162, and it literally means horn or a cornet to make a sound. Well, without taking the time and diligently looking in to what Daniel 8 is saying about these horns, you would have never caught it. I had personally never caught it before. So it starts off with a ram that has 2 horns. Then he goes up against a goat that has 1 horn. Then this 1 horn destroys the goat with 2 horns. So now 2 of them are gone, and there's 1 horn left. This 1 horn then ends up his horn breaks. And when his horn breaks right here, this great horn, his horn is broken. So there were three, there were two, then there was a third, two got crushed, and there was one left. Then his breaks, as it says here in Daniel 8:8. And in the place of that one, four of them show up. So we had 2 plus 1 plus 4. Now we have 6. And then what happens? Oh, wait, 7. We had 2 plus 1 plus 4. So we have 7. So we have 7 horns. Well, those can't be the same 10 be explained over of the 10 horns on the beast. Well, or can they? Let's keep counting the horns. So out of these 4 horns, which now makes 7, it says out of one of them came a little horn. Wait a second. So out of one of the 7 came an 8th. Out of the 7 came an 8th. This is precisely what we were just reading in Revelation chapter 17. But why are they called horns? Why wouldn't they be called heads? Why wouldn't they be called mountains? Well, lo and behold, when we go to this one, remember the last one of the 10 that are in his head that are 7162, they're actually horns. But every one of these are mountains. Every one of these 7 to the 8th, of which the 7 came from the 8th came from the 7th, they're not actually horns. They're mountains. So we can know where these 7 and the 8th one comes from, because this little horn that comes of the 7, who is now the 8th, this little horn is actually a mountain and is not the same little horn that comes out of the 10 horns, which these horns are actually the horns. This little horn that's going to come out from them is an actual horn. It's not a mountain. So we can see from Revelation 17, the beast that had 7 heads, of which from the 7, an 8th one comes up. We could see that those heads are mountains, and those mountains each have a king. We saw in Daniel chapter 8 that there were 7 horns, but that they didn't mean horns. They actually meant mountains. And we know that it wasn't relating to the 10 because there were only 7, and then an 8th came from among the 7, and they were mountains, which means Media, Persia, Grecia, which is going to be Arabia, and from Arabia, 4 more come up from that one, which makes it 7. And from one of those 7, which are Arabia, the 8th one will come up from one of the 7, because it can't be an actual 8th. It has to come up from one of the 7 that was already there, or one of those 4, right? But it's from that same area, which is Arabia, which means it's only Media, Persia, then Arabia, and then from Arabia, once that breaks, 4 more come from it, making it 7, still all in Arabia. And from those 4, the last one, the 4th one, is only going to have a short time. And then the little horn of the mountains, who is the 8th, is now what? There's no more heads. Those other 7 are gone, and he's come up from the midst of that 7th head, that 7th mountain. So now it's just the beast, who is that 7th or 8th that came out of that 7th head. So are we looking for any more heads? No. Now it's just the 10 horns, which had 7 heads. It's now that final one with the 10 horns on it. And in Revelation 13, we now see that those 10 horns are given 10 crowns. So now we can follow this. We could see who he is, who he represents. We know that it is from Arabia. He is absolutely from Arabia. And those heads outside of Media Persia, they're all going to be Arab. They're all going to be Muslim. But those final 1 plus the 4 and the 8 that comes out from one of the 4 is all from Arabia. And who gives this power? Watch this. This was so incredible. Who gives the power, as Roy had mentioned earlier, to the beast? The dragon. The dragon is the one who's going to give this authority to the beast. And we saw in Revelation 12, about mid-seals time, when the dragon is going to show up, who has the 7 heads and the 10 horns, but the crowns are on the 7 heads. When you get to 13, when their time and their authority and their power is done, we see that there are no more crowns on the 7 heads, because when the beast gets the authority, he is the 8th that came up from the 7. So there's no need for this authority of crowns being on the 7 heads, because he is the 8th of that 7. He is that final head. So now they're going to get their 7 crowns 1 hour with the beast. And the dragon gave him his authority, but the dragon isn't cast down yet. And it's the time of the beast and the false prophet. And it's directly related, as we saw in the days where the sun and the moon, or the Lucifer type and the false prophet type, how did they get their authority? They didn't fall first or on their own. Satan, who was the seraphim and the one of greater power, was with them. And just like they were given this power in the beings of light, Satan's giving the authority over Lucifer to go about his thing, which really is the father, the true father of all, allowing this to happen, to bring about the greatest tribulation time of the end of days, to bring about the greatest revival in the end of days. And then when the beast is killed, the Lord is here on Mount Zion in paradise. And then when he's cut off, that's when Satan is now cast down. And we're now in that creation of Adam and Eve. And when the fall happens in there, because Satan is cast down, Satan is now here. Lucifer is brought back. The false prophet is there. An exact picture of the creation story to the end of days, how it played out over 21,000 in the big picture, how it plays out in the 21 years, how it'll be 21 days to the Lord, and then the final new beginning, Jubilee creation of it all. It's awesome. It's so exciting to be able to see and to track. And that's it. That's all I got. If anybody had any questions, anybody else wants to ask or share or bring something up, feel free to let me know. I'm going to check this out real quick here in the chat. I think the chat was a little while ago. Yes, our brother Roy, it was late. So our brother Roy had to check out early. That's why I tried to do this a little bit earlier today, get going, give or take around 7 p.m. my time. You know, just to have some faces. And even though I know I do most of the talking, if people wanted to ask questions, they were more than free to ask the questions. I don't know what else. If anybody else has anything, we covered, you know, being able to have that strength and that hope, and being able to understand the Jubilee count, and that it only gave us a small window of a couple, maybe 3 years, but only a year 0 or a year 1 had any alignment. And knowing that we can't have year 0 in a Gregorian, everything falls into place. It's incredible to see, and to take that forward, and being able to see this in the fractal, and being able to see this with the enemy compared to the truth in the Lord. You know, to be able to see this breakdown now of the beast, and and understanding what these 7 mountains are and where they are and where they're going to play out. It's so incredible to see. I hope it's blessed you guys. I hope it was easier to follow and to track without going into the intense detail of everything. If you need to watch it again, feel free to post questions under this. Thank you, Catherine. I know people did have some questions, and it was able, especially with the 7 mountains, it was a lot to take in that video, as something new always is. So being able to see this again tonight and to rehash some of the key points briefly, hopefully that helped a bunch of you as well. Can you believe it? It's only been a couple of years. And sorry, a couple of years, a couple of hours in tonight's live show. So hopefully keeping it shorter like this, people can see all of these different points that were made tonight. They can be strengthened. They can grow in understanding. They could see greater revelation of all of creation. All of this in 2 hours. Hopefully it blesses you. I know it blesses me. I know it strengthens me when I do it. So with that, anything else to say? Anybody want to say good night? Say hello? All right, guys. With that, God bless you all. Thank you for joining us, Deborah and Catherine, and our role model for our brother Roy, who joined us for a bit, and for Neil, who joined us, and anybody else who had popped in and out. Thank you for spending some time with me in here and not letting me do it on my own. I like the company. I'm always looking for more questions than any comments people have, but that's okay. We did have a little bit of chatter here, so I appreciate it. I love you guys.
I've got a weird things pop into my head. Do Nephilim know they're Nephilim?
That is a strange question. What do you mean by that? Would people who are in the modern day who are still the Nephilim? Is that what you mean?
Do they know
Because,
that they are Nephilim?
it's an
And
interesting
if they
thought,
if they have children, do they know that they're a child of a Nephilim?
It's a very interesting thought, right? Because we know it says, and after the flood. So we know that they were still around after the flood. And people would say, well, there's no giants. And somebody would say, well, look at these real tall people. And people like to still point out that. But what we know has happened is they've all shrunk, and they've, blended and blended and blended over time and over time and over time. And they would look no different than you and I. So the question would be is, we can't tell by looking at them, but would there still be Nephilim now? I believe so. And they're probably connected to some of these behind the curtains, and the ones, really moving things along for what they think is their timeline, even though it's the Lord's. Would they know that they're Nephilim? I don't know that.
It's just a weird thought that comes in my head.
I don't know that anybody could answer that, but it would make sense that they could, because if they were of that evil lineage, they're the ones trying to bring about destruction and devastation and chaos, to take everything away from the sun. So it would make sense that them having that lineage through the fallen, that they would be the ones to know it and pass down and know it. And they would probably be doing rituals to indoctrinate into it and to take their kids into it. It would make sense, but can I say for certain? No. But it is one of those questions that makes you think. Yeah.
I was asking my husband that the other day, and I was like, I just wonder if they even know that they're Nephilim. I don't know.
Yeah.
Weird things pop in my head sometimes.
It's an interesting question, and I think it would make sense that they would know. When they get to a certain age and their family lets them know, and they probably take them into some indoctrination thing, and because they're the ones ruling the world, right? Taking over things and trying to bring about everything for the enemy. So it would make sense that you're working for the enemy if you're part of his bloodline. So
I guess there's no escaping that.
Yeah.
I finally figured out how to get my unmute off. So
there we go.
that is a good question, because Deborah, because that would be true with any typology that we're seeing, right? That they would know that they're playing a role. They would
Yeah.
have to. So not just on the demonic side, but also on the angelic side, I guess you call it, or spiritual
Yeah.
side. I've always wondered that too, Deborah. How would people know that they are a typology of what do you say?
Zerubbabel?
Bell or yeah, whoever.
Yeah. I wouldn't think somebody like that. Yeah. You know, I think that in this case, like a Zerubbabel and so forth, that if you know, in the case of a Zerubbabel, you might act differently. You know what I mean? That's the way I see it. Like if you knew you were a Zerubbabel type in the Bible, and you were going to be in this period, and you were going to bring about this rebuilding, and get the foundation laid, and you were going to be responsible for the actual overseeing of the rebuilding of the temple. You know, if you knew that you were prophetically there, directly related, and were going to be with Messiah, I don't know how somebody would take that. I think that would be hard to know far in advance. But I would believe at some point he's definitely going to know it, and it might be in the midst of
because
seals.
they're cursed from birth. I mean,
Yeah, those guys being cursed from birth. You
know he was gonna do that to Christ?
sorry?
Did Judas know he was going to do that to Christ until he did it?
Yeah, and yeah, he wouldn't have known.
So, and do
Well,
you know you're going to be a worker or?
exactly. I don't know that I'm going to be a worker. I
I
know
don't.
something's happening here, but I've never been told that I know without,
Right.
emphatically.
That's along the same lines. I don't think you really know
Yeah,
in that realm or in your realm.
yeah,
Oh, that's a good question, Deborah.
yeah.
Let me think about that for a while. Anyway,
Hello, Jeremy. You're coming in right at the end, brother.
I'm gonna
Hello.
sign off here. So good night, all.
All right, Catherine.
yeah,
Good
I
night.
gotta go too.
All right, Deborah. Thanks for joining,
All right.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Oh,
Hey, Jeremy.
missed the party. Hey, I actually had a question.
Sure.
It was about a specific difference in the Gospels. I was wondering if you had any insight about it. In like we only see it in Luke and Matthew. In Luke 12:6, we see are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings, and not one of them is forgotten before God. And then in Matthew, we see a similar thing, but it's worded differently. I think it was Matthew 10:29. He says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father." So yeah, I was wondering why is it like 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings in one, and 2 sparrows sold for 1 farthing in the other one? I don't know if it.
Yeah, you can see I have it highlighted. I haven't gone to look at this in a long time, probably like 4 years, at least, maybe even more. So
Okay.
I did look at it. I don't know that I had it fully understood yet back then, but I would have to take some time again. It would seem that there's a connection, obviously, to like the 7 churches, right?
Okay.
And in relation to the 5 compared to the 2. That's my first thought on it, but I would have to spend some time in it to
Okay.
see more clearly what it is. I haven't been in there in a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and the other one 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthing. Yeah, it leads me to believe that this connection is to the 7 churches, 7 churches, of which 5 we know, and the other 2 we know that there's no condemnation, right? We know one is the remnant seals workers, right through Smyrna, and then you've got the other workers as the 144 through Philadelphia. It seems to be there's something going on there. So 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings, and then you had 2 sparrows. Yeah, so what would be the 2 sparrows for a single farthing? Yeah,
But also,
I don't. There's something going on with that in that connection, but I'm not sure.
yeah.
I'd need
All
more
right.
time.
All right. Was just wondering.
No problem.
Thanks.
I like you guys coming on for questions, but I won't have all the answers.
Yeah, it's fine.
Perfect. I do my best. Outside of that, how are things over there? Life is good. Everything's okay.
Yeah, doing good.
Doing good. Are you in Montreal or outside of Montreal?
I'm outside of Montreal, a bit south of Montreal, but pretty close.
Okay. Have you ever met or hooked up with Jimmy yet?
No, no, I have
Jimmy
not.
Luttrell? No.
No.
You could
Is he
always
in Montreal?
Jimmy Latrell.
Is he in
You know
Montreal?
what? Yeah, he's right. He's right in and around Montreal. Like I don't know if he's slightly moved out from where he was, but it's right around Montreal as well. He
Okay.
does our website right from the beginning. He takes care of the website for us. He goes out and does preaching and stuff too, and has done healings, and it would be pretty interesting. You guys could always hook up. If you wanted to reach him, you can just go in when you're in the forum, just look up Jimmy Luttrell and then send him a direct message. And people are meeting up all over the world, from South Africa to Texas to Australia and the UK, meeting in different pockets of people all over the world. I think you guys would hit it off too. And 2 French brothers,
Yeah.
right? Easy. And I think, yeah, and then we've got another sister. I think she's close to Montreal too, with Chantal. I don't know if she's right near Montreal or not, but yeah, there's a few of you guys out there. So if ever, somebody to talk with, especially when it comes to what we know and what we understand here, it's like pulling teeth trying to get people to take a little time to pay attention. So sometimes it's nice to have somebody close by that you can chat with about it. And if you're close enough, maybe you guys can grab a coffee once in a while, or and maybe other people can join eventually. And yeah. So just thought I'd throw that out there for you too.
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks.
All right, guys. With that, I think we are done for the night. So God bless you. God bless your families. And we will talk to you all very soon. God bless you. Bye for now.